The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. The ceiling fans turned lazily above, but they did little to ease the heavy air. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder in the gallery, their cameras and notepads ready. Every click of a pen sounded too loud in the tense silence. It wasn't just any trial. It was the case that had shaken the entire town. At the defense table sat the man everyone had been talking about for weeks, Richard Cole, dressed in a sharp suit that didn't quite hide his smug expression. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering something with a faint smirk on his lips. He looked confident, too confident for someone accused of breaking into a family's home and nearly getting away with it. Across from him, the prosecutor organized her files, her jaw tight with determination. The case had been a nightmare to prove. The evidence was thin, circumstantial at best. Every lead seemed to have a loophole, and the defense had been ruthless in tearing the case apart. But everyone's attention eventually drifted to the front row of seats, where the victim's family sat. The mother clutched her daughter tightly, a little girl with dark curls and tear-swollen eyes. She wore a pale yellow dress and held a stuffed bunny so tightly that its fur had gone flat in spots. The girl's father sat rigidly beside them, one hand gripping his knee, the other clenched into a fist. He hadn't spoken all morning, but his face was a storm of emotions: anger, fear, hope, all fighting for space. And near the back, sitting with quiet, watchful patience, was Max. Max was a German shepherd with deep brown eyes that missed nothing. His handler, Officer Daniels, sat beside him, occasionally running a hand down Max's back to keep him calm. Max had been part of the police force for 4 years, a seasoned canine who had tracked fugitives, found missing people, and stood guard at dozens of trials. But today was different. Today, Max's role wasn't just security. Today, he was here for one person, the tiny girl sitting near the front. The bailiff's voice cut through the tension. All rise. Everyone stood as Judge Harrington entered, his black robe sweeping behind him. He looked down at the courtroom over his glasses, scanning the faces before him. The air seemed to grow heavier. "You may be seated," he said, his voice calm but firm. The shuffle of chairs echoed across the room. The judge glanced at the jury, then at the attorneys. "Are we ready to proceed?" "Yes, Your Honor," the prosecutor said. "Yes, Your Honor," the defense echoed. The judge nodded. "And let's continue." As opening statements began, the prosecutor painted a picture of a quiet night turned into a nightmare. She spoke of a family awakened by the sound of shattering glass, of a terrified child screaming in the dark, of a man fleeing into the night only to be caught blocks away. Her words were sharp, meant to grab the jury's attention and hold it. But as the defense rose to respond, the mood shifted. The defense attorney was smooth, confident. He spoke of unreliable witnesses, of the possibility of mistaken identity, of evidence that merely suggests, but does not prove. He made the jury look at his client like an innocent man caught in a misunderstanding. And sitting silent through it all was the little girl. She hadn't said a word since that night. Not to her parents. Not to the police. Not to the therapists who had gently tried to coax her to speak. It was as if fear had stolen her voice. The prosecutor knew the jury needed more than forensics and timelines. They needed the girl. She was the only witness who had actually seen what happened. But how could they put a 3-year-old on the stand when she hadn't spoken in weeks? The prosecutor glanced toward Officer Daniels and Max. Daniels gave a small nod, as if to say, "When you're ready, we're ready." The morning stretched on, the courtroom a quiet battlefield of objections and exhibits. But under all the legal arguments, everyone knew the truth. The outcome of this trial might rest on a little girl who hadn't spoken a word. The judge finally called for a short recess. The family stood, and the mother knelt down to whisper to her daughter. The girl's eyes flickered toward the back of the room, toward Max, and for the first time all day, something in her face softened. Max stood too, stretching slightly, his tail giving one slow wag as he watched her. Daniels didn't say a word, but he saw it, the spark. The connection between girl and dog was still there. When court reconvened, the prosecutor stood. "Your Honor," she began, "the state would like to make an unusual request." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Go on. We believe the child is capable of testifying, but only under special circumstances. She has not spoken since the night of the attack, except in the presence of Officer Daniels' K-9 partner, Max. We would like to allow Max to be near her during questioning." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The defense immediately stood. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "A dog in the witness stand? This is not procedure." The judge considered this, his brow furrowed. "I will allow it," he finally said. "If it helps the child communicate, the court will make an exception. But proceed carefully." The girl's mother hugged her tightly before lifting her to the witness chair. The stuffed bunny came with her, clutched in one hand. Max moved forward, sitting close enough for the girl to reach him. For a moment, everything was still. The prosecutor crouched to the girl's level. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "Max is here with you. Do you remember Max?" The girl nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Would you like Max to stay with you?" Another small nod. Max's tail thumped once against the floor. The entire courtroom leaned in. It wasn't testimony yet, but it was the first response the girl had given since that terrible night, and it was a start. Judge Harrington watched quietly, his face softening. "Proceed," he said. And so it began. The prosecutor stood once more, her heels clicking softly against the polished courtroom floor as she moved toward the jury box. Her voice was steady, deliberate, as she began laying out the state's evidence piece by piece. "Exhibit A," she said, holding up a photograph of the broken window. This was the point of entry. Glass fragments were found both inside and outside the home, consistent with a break-in. The jurors leaned forward slightly, studying the picture. "Exhibit B," she continued, revealing a bagged crowbar with a smudge of fingerprints. "Recovered near the back fence. Prints partially match the defendant's right hand. The words partially match hung in the air, like a warning bell." The defense attorney was on his feet immediately. "Objection. Your Honor, the prints were smudged and inconclusive, as the forensic report clearly states." The judge glanced at the prosecutor. "Sustained. Jury will disregard the statement about the prints being a match." The prosecutor forced a polite smile, masking her frustration. This was how it had been since the trial began. Every piece of evidence seemed to unravel under cross-examination. She pressed on. "Exhibit C," she said, projecting a grainy security camera still onto the screen. It showed a man running from the scene, his face blurred, his body partially obscured by shadows. "This is from a neighbor's security camera at 11:42 p.m., approximately 2 minutes after the break-in was reported." Before she could say another word, the defense spoke again, his tone dripping with confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you can barely tell if that's a man, let alone my client. This is not evidence. This is guesswork." The jury exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. The prosecutor swallowed hard. The truth was, he wasn't wrong. The footage was too grainy. The lighting was bad. It wasn't the slam-dunk piece of evidence she had hoped it would be. Piece by piece, her case was crumbling. She moved on to witness testimony. The neighbor who had called 911 swore she had seen a man matching the defendant's description fleeing the scene, but under cross-examination, the defense pointed out that it had been dark, and the witness had been more than 50 feet away. "Are you sure it wasn't just someone passing by?" the defense asked. The witness faltered. "I I think it was him. You think? The attorney repeated, seizing on the word. But you aren't sure? No. I'm not sure. The jurors scribbled notes. The prosecutor could feel the case slipping like sand through her fingers. When the prosecution rested, the defense rose for its turn. The defense attorney strolled confidently in front of the jury, hands clasped casually behind his back. Ladies and gentlemen, he said smoothly, what we have here is a rush to judgment. The state wants you to believe my client is guilty, based on broken glass, a blurry video, and the frightened assumptions of a traumatized neighbor. He gestured toward Richard Cole, who sat calmly at the table. Look at him. He is a hard-working man with no prior record, no reason to harm anyone. The police needed someone to blame, and they chose him. He paused, letting his words hang in the air like a challenge. The jury members shifted in their seats. Some nodded slightly, others frowned. The prosecutor could see doubt beginning to take root. The defense attorney's voice softened, almost sympathetic. And the most tragic part of this case? The only person who could truly tell us what happened that night, the only person who saw the intruder up close, is too young and too frightened to speak. The state is asking you to guess. But in a courtroom, guesswork is not justice. He returned to his seat with a satisfied smile. The judge called for a brief recess, and the courtroom erupted in hushed conversation. Reporters hurriedly scribbled notes, already framing their headlines. Case falls apart in court would surely make tomorrow's front page. At the prosecutor's table, a quiet desperation settled in. She flipped through her notes, searching for something, anything that could turn the tide. But there was nothing new to present, no surprise evidence hidden in the file. Her eyes drifted toward the front row. The little girl sat there, staring down at her shoes. She looked so small, so fragile. The prosecutor's heart ached. They had tried everything to help her speak. Child psychologists, play therapy, even recorded interviews with puppets and toys. Nothing had worked. The trauma had locked her voice away somewhere deep inside. And yet, the one glimmer of hope had come just days ago, during a brief meeting at the police station. Officer Daniels had brought Max into the room. At first, the girl had shrunk back, clutching her mother. But Max had simply sat quietly a few feet away, his ears forward, his gaze soft and steady. Minutes passed. Slowly, the girl had inched closer, until she was close enough to touch him. When she finally laid her hand on Max's fur, something shifted. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing slowed. And then, barely louder than a whisper, she had said her first words in weeks. "Hi, Max." Daniels had seen this before. Some children, especially those who had experienced trauma, found it easier to trust animals than people. Now, sitting in the courtroom, Daniels caught the prosecutor's eye and gave a small, encouraging nod. It was a risk. A huge one. But the case was unraveling fast, and there might not be another chance. When the recess ended, the prosecutor stood. Her voice was calm, but inside her chest, her heart was pounding. "Your Honor," she said, "the state requests permission to allow the child to communicate with the court in the presence of the K-9. Max." The judge's brows lifted. "The dog?" "Yes, Your Honor. The child has been nonverbal since the incident, but she has responded when in Max's presence. We believe she may be able to answer simple questions with Max near her." A ripple of surprise ran through the courtroom. The defense attorney shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is absurd. What possible evidentiary value could there be in putting a dog next to a witness?" The judge held up a hand. "I will hear arguments at sidebar." Both attorneys approached the bench. The conversation was tense, quiet enough that the rest of the courtroom could only guess at the words. When they stepped back, the judge looked down at the gallery. "The court will allow it. The witness may remain seated near the dog for questioning. Bailiff, bring the child forward. The mother bent low, whispering to her daughter. The girl's tiny hand reached for Max instinctively as she stood. Officer Daniels guided them toward the front, Max walking at a steady pace, his presence calm and grounding. The girl climbed into the witness chair, clutching both her bunny and Max's fur. The courtroom fell into a silence, so deep it was almost eerie. Everyone was watching. This was it. If she didn't speak now, the case might be lost forever. The room was so silent that even the sound of Max's paws against the polished floor seemed loud. Each step echoed with weight, like something monumental was about to happen. Officer Daniels kept his hand on Max's harness. Though Max didn't need the guidance, he already knew exactly where he was going. The little girl's breath quickened as Max approached, but she didn't pull away. Instead, her grip on the stuffed bunny loosened just a little. She had seen Max before. She remembered him. "Would you like Max to sit with you?" the prosecutor asked gently. The girl nodded once, small but enough for everyone to see. Daniels gave the hand signal, and Max eased himself down onto the floor beside the witness chair, his head level with the girl's lap. His brown eyes were soft, calm, steady, the very picture of quiet patience. The girl reached out a trembling hand and laid it on Max's head. His tail thumped once against the floor. That sound broke the tension like a match to paper. The entire courtroom seemed to exhale at once. Judge Harrington leaned forward slightly, his stern expression softening. "Proceed," he said. The prosecutor crouched so she was eye level with the girl. Her tone was quiet, almost like a lullaby. "Sweetheart, do you remember Max?" The girl nodded again. "Do you know why you're here today?" The girl's lip quivered. She looked down at Max, then back at the prosecutor. Daniels spoke softly, his voice calm and reassuring. "It's okay, kiddo. You don't have to be scared. Max is right here with you." Max seemed to understand the importance of the moment. He leaned slightly against the girl's legs, offering his silent strength. The girl's breathing slowed. "Can you tell Max what happened that night?" the prosecutor asked softly, almost like a bedtime story. "You can just whisper it to him if you want." The girl hesitated, her small hand twisting the bunny's ear. The courtroom held its breath. Then, slowly, she leaned closer to Max and whispered into his fur. Daniel smiled faintly. "Can you say that just a little louder so we can all hear?" The girl's eyes darted nervously toward the defense table. The man sitting there, Richard Cole, was staring at her, his face expressionless. Max shifted his weight, almost protectively, and rested his chin gently on the girl's lap. And just like that, the fear seemed to melt away. The girl's voice came, small but clear enough to be heard by every person in the room. "Bad man," the words rang through the air like a gunshot. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Someone in the back actually dropped a pen. "Sweetheart," the prosecutor said softly, "can you show us the bad man?" The girl raised her tiny finger and pointed directly at Richard Cole. The defendant's jaw clenched. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, as if warning him to stay calm. But the damage was done. The little girl turned back to Max and buried her face in his fur, her small shoulders shaking. Not from fear this time, but from relief, as though speaking those two words had freed her from a terrible weight. Daniels crouched beside them, rubbing Max's back. "Good job," he whispered, not sure if he was talking to the girl, the dog, or both. The judge cleared his throat. "Order in the court," he said, though his voice was softer than usual. Even he seemed moved by what had just happened. The defense attorney stood quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay at best. The child's statement cannot be considered reliable evidence." The prosecutor rose immediately. Your Honor, the child's testimony is direct, not hearsay. She identified the defendant without prompting, in the presence of a support animal trained for this very purpose. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked at the jury. The testimony will stand, he ruled. The defense attorney sat down heavily, his face pale. The prosecutor returned her attention to the girl. You did so well, she said softly. Can you tell Max anything else about that night? The girl nodded again. He had red shoes. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The prosecutor glanced at the evidence file, flipping quickly through photographs. There it was, the pair of bright red sneakers collected from Richard Cole's apartment. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, holding up the photograph. The witness just provided a new detail. The defendant's shoes match her description exactly. The jury's heads turned, almost in unison toward the defendant's feet, as though expecting him to be wearing them even now. The girl, satisfied that she had said what she needed to, clutched Max's fur and sighed softly, her tiny shoulders relaxing. It wasn't much, just 2 words and a small detail. But in that moment, the case shifted. Every person in the courtroom felt it. Richard Cole no longer looked smug. For the first time since the trial began, he looked nervous. The prosecutor gave a small nod to Daniels and Max. Thank you, she said quietly. As the girl was led back to her mother's arms, Max trotted alongside her, tail swishing gently. The gallery watched in silence as the mother knelt to hug her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face. The judge called for another recess, giving the room a chance to recover from the emotional blow. In the hallway outside, reporters were already calling their editors. They had just witnessed the turning point of the trial. Inside the courtroom, the prosecutor sat down and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For the first time in days, she felt hope. Daniels gave Max a quiet pat. Good work, partner, he murmured. Max's ears twitched, but he didn't move. He just sat watching the door where the girl had exited, as if guarding the memory of what she had just done. For a moment, no one moved. The little girl's voice, those 2 tiny, powerful words, seemed to hang in the air long after they had been spoken. Bad man. It was as if the entire courtroom had been struck by lightning. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even the court stenographer, usually stoic and mechanical, hesitated for half a second before her fingers resumed typing. Richard Cole stiffened at the defense table. His eyes narrowed, and for just a flicker of a second, his mask slipped, a flash of anger, quickly hidden behind a carefully neutral expression. But the jury had seen it. Everyone had. The judge cleared his throat, his gavel rapping once against the bench. Order, he said, but his voice lacked its usual sharpness. Even he seemed shaken by the weight of the child's words. The prosecutor stood frozen for a beat, letting the silence stretch, letting the power of the moment settle into the jury's minds. This was what she had been waiting for, the moment that could make or break the case. Then, carefully, she asked, "Sweetheart, can you show Max who the bad man is?" The girl's small hand rose, trembling but determined, and pointed straight at Richard Cole. The gallery erupted into a low, disbelieving murmur. Order. The judge barked again, louder this time. Quiet in the courtroom. The defense attorney shot to his feet. Your Honor, we object. The child's testimony is unreliable. She's 3 years old, traumatized, and clearly influenced by the presence of the dog. She wasn't influenced, the prosecutor snapped, her voice sharp with controlled fire. She was comforted enough to speak. This is the first time we have heard directly from the only eyewitness who saw the defendant that night. The judge raised a hand to silence both sides. Objection is noted and overruled. The child's statement will stand. The defense attorney's jaw tightened. He knew the damage was done. The prosecutor knelt again, softening her voice for the girl. You did a very brave thing. Can you tell Max anything else about that night? The girl hesitated. Her hand clutched Max's fur tighter. Then, slowly, she said, "Red shoes." The prosecutor's heart leapt. She quickly flipped through the evidence folder on the table behind her and held up a photo. Your Honor, the defendant's property included a pair of red sneakers, seized during his arrest, she said, showing the picture to the jury. This is a detail the witness has never been told. The jury shifted, their faces hardening as they connected the dots. The defense attorney tried to interject. Coincidence. Red shoes are common, but the prosecutor cut him off. Common, yes. But this is a 3-year-old child who has been silent for weeks. She saw the intruder. She just identified the defendant in open court and described a unique piece of clothing that ties him to the scene. She turned back to the girl. You did so well, sweetheart. The child leaned forward and buried her face against Max's head. The big German shepherd stayed completely still, letting her cling to him, his tail tapping softly against the floor. It was no longer just testimony. It was a picture of innocence and courage that every single person in that room would carry with them. The judge called for a short recess to allow the child to leave the witness stand. Her mother scooped her into her arms, tears streaming freely now. Reporters scribbled frantically, knowing this moment would be front-page news by morning. When the jury filed out for the break, their expressions were different. More focused. More resolved. The prosecutor sat down, her heart pounding, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She had taken a massive risk, putting a traumatized 3-year-old in front of a courtroom, but it had paid off. Across the aisle, Richard Cole's confident facade had cracked. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering furiously. The defense attorney's expression was grim. He knew the jury had seen something today that could not be unseen. When court reconvened, the defense went on the offensive. Your Honor, the attorney began, the defense moves to strike the child's testimony on the grounds that it was unduly influenced by the presence of the police dog and therefore cannot be considered reliable. The judge steepled his fingers, considering. Motion denied. The child's testimony was given voluntarily and is admissible. The defense attorney switched tactics, turning to the jury in his closing arguments. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge you, do not let emotion replace reason. This case is built on the testimony of a 3-year-old. Children can be mistaken. They can be led. The state wants you to convict a man's life away based on 2 words. He gestured toward Richard Cole, who now sat very still, his eyes darting nervously around the room. But this is not about sympathy, the lawyer continued. This is about proof, and the state hasn't given you proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It was a strong argument, but it felt weaker now than it had just hours ago. The prosecutor rose for her turn, her voice calm but cutting. You heard those 2 words, she said to the jury. 2 words that no one forced, no one suggested. That child found her courage because she felt safe enough to tell the truth. And when she pointed at the man who broke into her home, she was not guessing. She was remembering. She gave you a new detail, the red shoes, that matches the evidence. That is not coincidence. That is memory. That is truth. Her words rang with quiet power. When she sat down, the courtroom was silent. Max lay at the girl's feet near the front row, his head resting on his paws. He seemed to know that something big had just happened, something important. For the first time since the trial began, it wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a moral one. And everyone in that room knew the tide had turned. The courtroom was quieter than it had been all day. The air felt heavy, as though everyone was holding their breath. The jury's faces were unreadable now, but there was something in their posture, a collective leaning forward, a need to know what came next. Richard Cole sat hunched at the defense table, his jaw tight, his fingers clenched so hard they turned white. He had always projected calm during this trial, always worn that smug half-smile. But now there was a new look on his face, fear. His attorney, Victor Harlan, stood slowly, adjusting his tie. This was his moment to try to turn the tide before it swept his client away completely. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carefully measured, "before we proceed to closing arguments, the defense would like to call Dr. Emily Rains, a child psychology expert, to the stand." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The judge gave a short nod. Dr. Rains entered, a calm, professional-looking woman with kind eyes and a clipboard. She was sworn in and took her seat. "Dr. Rains," Victor said, pacing slightly before the jury, "can you explain how a child as young as 3 might be influenced to say certain things, even unintentionally?" Dr. Rains folded her hands. "Children that age are highly impressionable. They can be swayed by suggestion, tone of voice, even body language. They want to please adults, especially authority figures." Victor nodded. "And in your professional opinion, could the presence of a familiar, comforting object, say, a dog, encourage a child to speak, but also potentially cause them to say what they think adults want to hear?" "Yes," she replied evenly. "It is possible. Comfort can lower inhibitions, but it does not guarantee accuracy." The jury shifted slightly. Victor pressed on. "So it is entirely possible that this child, traumatized, frightened, simply repeated something she heard, or pointed to the man she saw others looking at, without actually remembering him?" Dr. Rains hesitated. "It is possible," she repeated. Victor turned to the jury, his voice gaining strength. "Ladies and gentlemen, there is no denying what you saw was emotional. But emotion is not evidence. We cannot send a man to prison for life based on a scared toddler's guess." He sat down, clearly satisfied with his attempt to plant seeds of doubt. But the prosecutor wasn't about to let the moment pass. She rose and approached the witness stand. "Dr. Rains," she said gently, "you said comfort can lower a child's inhibitions. Isn't it true that children who experience severe trauma often stop speaking altogether, and that regaining their voice is a sign of recovery, not fabrication?" Dr. Rains nodded. "Yes, that is true. And would a fabricated memory include a detail like red shoes, which matched physical evidence no one had told the child about?" "No," Dr. Rains admitted. "That would be unlikely." The prosecutor turned to the jury, letting the point sink in before thanking the witness and returning to her table. Max, the police dog, sat quietly near the front row, but his presence seemed to anchor the entire room. The child, now sitting in her mother's lap, stroked his fur absently, calmer than she had been in weeks. The judge called for a lunch recess. When court resumed, it would be time for closing arguments, the final chance for each side to sway the jury before deliberations began. During the break, the hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with reporters. Cameras flashed as lawyers passed through, refusing to give comments. The case had become the most talked-about trial in the state, not because of its brutality, though that was shocking enough, but because of the extraordinary witness who had broken the silence. Inside a quiet conference room, the prosecutor leaned over her table with her team. "We have to hit them hard in closing. The defense is going to harp on the idea that the girl was coached. We should lean on the shoes," one of her assistants said. That was gold. It proved she saw him. The prosecutor nodded, already formulating her argument. Across the hall, Victor sat with Richard Cole. His client was sweating now, running a hand through his hair over and over. "They believe her," Richard hissed. "I can see it on their faces. They believe her." Victor kept his voice low. "You need to stay calm. We still have a shot." "I planted doubt," We just have to hope it takes root. But Richard wasn't calm. He slammed his hand against the table, making the coffee cups rattle. If that brat ruins this for me, Victor shot him a look. Watch yourself. You lose your temper like that in front of the jury, it's over. They're already on edge. Richard bit his tongue and looked away, seething. When court resumed, the tension was palpable. The jury filed back in, their expressions serious. Victor delivered his closing argument first, pacing slowly as he addressed them. This case is tragic, he said solemnly. But tragedy does not equal guilt. You are being asked to send a man to prison based on two words spoken by a toddler, who could barely understand what she was asked. He gestured toward the girl. Your hearts may ache for her, but your duty is to use your heads. There is no forensic evidence tying my client to the scene. No fingerprints. No DNA. Only a frightened child and a pair of shoes that could belong to anyone. He sat down, his face grave, his tone leading the words to linger in the jury's minds. Then the prosecutor rose. Her voice was steady, but there was a quiet fire behind it. You heard the defense tell you to use your heads, she said. I'm asking you to use both your heads and your hearts, because justice requires both. She walked to the evidence board, pointing to the photo of the red shoes. This is not just anyone's shoes. These were seized from the defendant's home. They matched the footprint found in the victim's yard. And when this little girl, who has been silent for weeks, saw Max, she spoke. Not because she was told to, not because she was guessing, but because she remembered. Her voice softened as she glanced at the child. She found her courage because she felt safe. She told you the truth. And now, it is up to you to act on that truth. When she sat down, the room was silent once again. The judge gave the jury instructions and dismissed them to begin deliberations. Richard Cole sat very still, but his leg bounced under the table. Victor whispered something to him, but he barely seemed to hear. Hours passed. The courthouse halls grew tense and quiet. Every so often, the jury sent a note with a question about evidence, and each time it came back, Richard's face grew paler. Finally, late that evening, the bailiff announced, "A jury has reached a verdict." Everyone filed back into the courtroom. Max stood and stretched, as if he too sensed that something momentous was about to happen. The jury foreman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant." But the words that would follow would shake the courtroom even more than the child's testimony had. The courtroom fell utterly silent. Even the faint hum of the ceiling fan seemed to vanish as every person in the room turned toward the jury box. The foreman held the paper with both hands, his expression grave. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Richard Cole." A pause, just long enough to make every heart in the room pound. Guilty on all counts. For half a second, no one breathed. Then the room erupted. Gasps, tears, whispers, the sound of 100 emotions crashing together. The prosecutor closed her eyes, relief washing over her like a tidal wave. The child's mother clutched her daughter to her chest, sobbing silently. Max, the police dog, gave a low, almost approving chuff and wagged his tail as though he understood what had just happened. At the defense table, Richard Cole's face twisted with rage. "No," he barked, slamming his hand on the table so hard that the jurors jumped. The judge banged his gavel sharply. "Order! Order in the court." Two bailiffs moved quickly toward the defense table as Cole rose to his feet, shouting, "This is a setup. That brat is lying. You can't do this to me." "Mr. Cole, sit down," the judge commanded. But Cole wasn't finished. His face turned red as he glared at the little girl sitting in the gallery. "You ruined everything," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You." Before he could finish, Max lunged to his feet, standing between the girl and the defendant, his hackles raised. The sound that came from the dog was low, deep, and primal, a sound that froze Cole mid-sentence. The bailiffs grabbed him, forcing him back into his seat and cuffing his hands behind his back. "Remove the defendant from the courtroom," the judge ordered. As Richard Cole was dragged away, still shouting and cursing, the room felt lighter, as if a storm had finally passed. The prosecutor approached the girl and her mother. She knelt so she was eye level with the child. "You did it," she said softly. "Because of you, he can't hurt anyone ever again." The little girl didn't say anything at first. Then she whispered, "Max helped me." The prosecutor smiled, tears prickling her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. Max helped you." The judge dismissed the jury and set a date for sentencing. Slowly, the room emptied, but reporters crowded outside, eager for statements. The prosecutor stepped up to the microphones. "Today's verdict is a victory not just for this brave child and her family," she said, "but for justice. It reminds us that sometimes the smallest voices can speak the loudest truth." When she turned back, the girl was hugging Max tightly. The dog sat still, patient as ever, his tail sweeping the floor in slow, content arcs. Later, outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as the mother carried her daughter down the steps. Max trotted faithfully beside them, wearing his canine badge on his collar. "Can we keep him?" the girl asked innocently, loud enough for reporters to hear. Everyone chuckled, including the prosecutor. "He still has work to do," she said, "but he'll always be your friend." The girl reached down and patted Max's head. "Good dog," she whispered. Max gave a small bark, as if acknowledging her words. The moment made headlines that night. Canine and toddler bring justice and hope to Heartbroken Town. But the story wasn't over yet. The verdict had brought relief, yes, but also left questions. What had really happened that night? How had the defendant chosen his victims? And could the little girl's testimony help investigators uncover more victims they hadn't yet found? In the days that followed, detectives continued to dig. With Cole behind bars, witnesses who had once been too afraid to speak began coming forward. One by one, puzzle pieces clicked into place. It turned out Cole had been stalking the family for weeks, waiting for the right night. The red shoes, the girl remembered, had left prints near other crime scenes as well, crimes that had gone unsolved until now. The little girl's 2 words hadn't just solved one case. They had broken open several. When the prosecutor visited the girl and her mother a week later, she brought Max with her. The girl's face lit up when she saw him. "Hi, Max," she said, hugging him around the neck. "He's here to say thank you," the prosecutor told her. "Because of you, other families will finally get answers too." The mother's eyes welled up with tears. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You already did," the prosecutor said. "You believed in your daughter, even when she couldn't speak. That's why we're here today." Max sat patiently, letting the girl pet him until she giggled again, a sound no one had heard in months. For the first time, the little girl wasn't just a witness. She was a survivor. And because of her, a dangerous man was behind bars for good. The courthouse felt different on sentencing day. There was no longer a question of guilt. Richard Cole had been convicted, but the air still buzzed with anticipation. People wanted to see justice carried through to the very end. Reporters lined the steps, cameras flashing as the prosecutor entered with her team. Inside, the little girl and her mother sat quietly near the front row. Max, wearing his canine vest polished to a shine, lay at their feet like a living shield. Richard Cole shuffled into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, his wrists cuffed. The smug grin he had worn throughout most of the trial was gone. He looked thinner, angrier, but his eyes still darted around the room with that familiar, unsettling intensity. The judge entered, and everyone rose. When the room was seated again, The judge cleared his throat. "Today we are here to deliver sentencing in the matter of the state versus Richard Cole," he said. "Before we proceed, the victim's family has the right to make a statement." The mother stood, holding her daughter's hand. She turned to face the courtroom, her voice trembling but strong. "You took so much from us," she said, looking directly at Cole. "You thought we would stay silent. You thought fear would keep us quiet forever. But you were wrong. My daughter found her voice. And today we are free from you." The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of quiet weeping from a few spectators. The little girl squeezed her mother's hand, then let go and walked, on her own, to stand beside Max. Everyone watched as she reached out and touched the dog's collar. Then, in a small but steady voice, she said, "Bad man." It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a cry. It was a statement of fact, and it carried more weight than any closing argument ever could. The judge nodded solemnly. "Thank you. The court has heard enough." He turned to Cole. "Richard Cole, for your crimes, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." A collective breath of relief passed through the courtroom. Justice had been served. But then, just as the bailiffs moved to escort him out, Cole acted. In one sudden motion, he lunged at the nearest bailiff, shoving him aside. Chaos exploded as people gasped and ducked. Cole made a break for the side door, his cuffs clanking as he ran. But he didn't make it far. Max shot forward like a missile, his training kicking in. With a single, powerful leap, he brought Cole to the ground, pinning him until the bailiffs could grab him. The entire courtroom erupted into applause, spontaneous, relieved, almost cathartic. "Order!" The judge barked, though even he couldn't hide a faint smile. "Get him out of my courtroom immediately." Cole was dragged away, shouting curses until the heavy door slammed shut behind him. The little girl didn't flinch. She simply knelt and hugged Max tightly. "Good dog," she whispered. The judge looked over his glasses at her. "Young lady," he said gently, "it seems you and Max have done more for justice than anyone else in this room." The courtroom laughed softly, and for the first time since the trial began, the atmosphere felt light. Outside, the courthouse steps were packed with reporters again. This time, the mother didn't shield her daughter from the cameras. "She's stronger now," she told them proudly. "She's not afraid anymore." When asked about Max, the prosecutor smiled. "He's already back on duty, but today he's a hero." Max sat obediently, looking straight at the crowd, his ears perked as though he knew they were talking about him. That night, the story dominated the news cycle. Headlines read, "Courtroom Heroics. K9 brings down convicted felon during escape attempt." It was more than just a headline. She had faced her fear twice now. Once when she spoke, and once when she watched the man who hurt her try to run free. And both times she had seen justice prevail. Her nightmares became less frequent in the weeks that followed. When she did wake up frightened, her mother would remind her, "He can't hurt us anymore." Max made sure of that. It worked. Soon, the girl began to smile more. She played with her toys again. She even started drawing pictures of Max, first with crayons, then in finger paint, always with a big gold star on his collar. The prosecutor stopped by one afternoon with a surprise. A framed photo of Max taken on the courthouse steps, with a small plaque underneath that read, "To the bravest witness, thank you for speaking the truth." The girl hugged the picture and giggled. "Can I see Max again?" she asked hopefully. Soon, the prosecutor promised. And deep down, everyone knew that Max would be back, not because of another case, but because he had become part of this little girl's healing. Justice had been served. But more importantly, hope had been restored. The weeks following Richard Cole's sentencing were quiet, almost peaceful, for the first time in what felt like forever. The little girl's home had returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as a family could get after trauma. The front door was locked, the windows secure, and yet the most important protection wasn't in metal or glass. It was in Max. Every morning, the girl would wake up and pat the big German shepherd's head. "Good morning, Max," she'd whisper, her tiny voice carrying confidence and joy that had been missing for months. Max had become more than just a police dog in her eyes. He was a guardian, a hero, and the reason she had found her voice. One crisp Saturday morning, the family invited the prosecutor and Officer Daniels over for a small celebration, more for the girl than anything else. Balloons were tied to the porch, and the smell of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies filled the kitchen. The little girl ran to the front door when she heard footsteps outside. Her mother lifted her up and pointed. Max trotted beside the visitors, tail high, as if he knew this was a moment to be proud. The girl gasped, "Max, you're here." Daniels knelt to greet her. "Hey, kiddo. Did you miss me?" She hugged him around the waist, then looked up at the prosecutor. "You came too. You didn't forget me." The prosecutor smiled warmly. "I could never forget the bravest little witness I've ever met." They spent the morning playing games, baking, and laughing. It was a stark contrast to the tension-filled days in the courtroom, yet the memory of those days lingered like a shadow. Still, every time the girl looked at Max, she felt safe. Later, after the laughter had died down and everyone was seated for a quiet snack, the mother spoke softly to the girl. "You were so brave, honey. Do you know that?" The girl nodded. "I just told Max the truth," she said simply. Her mother smiled. "Yes, and the truth made everyone listen. You helped put a very bad man away." The girl leaned against Max's side, stroking his fur. "He can't hurt us anymore, right?" "Nope," Daniels replied, his voice firm yet comforting. "He's behind bars. And Max will always be here for you." The girl's eyes sparkled with a mixture of relief and pride. She leaned down and whispered into Max's ear. "Thank you." Max gave a gentle nuzzle in return, and the girl's small laugh filled the room. It was a sound that had been absent for far too long. Over the next few weeks, the community began to recognize the girl's bravery and Max's heroism. Local news outlets ran stories highlighting the pair, and donations poured in to support child victims of crime and to fund canine programs for the police department. The prosecutor returned to the office one afternoon and found a letter waiting for her. It was from the little girl. Written in her careful, toddlerish handwriting, it read, "Dear Miss Parker, thank you for helping me. Max helped me talk. I am brave now. I like him. He is my friend. Love, Lily." Tears welled up in the prosecutor's eyes. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer. For her, it was a reminder of why she had chosen this career, to bring justice, to protect the innocent, and sometimes to witness the smallest voices make the loudest difference. Meanwhile, Max's handler, Officer Daniels, received commendations for his work with both the canine and the young witness. But Daniels always insisted the real hero wasn't him. "It's the kid," he said, smiling. She told the truth. Max just helped her. On a quiet Sunday morning, the little girl and her mother walked Max in the park. Birds chirped, the sun shone softly through the trees, and for the first time in months, the girl wasn't looking over her shoulder. "Max," she said, kneeling down beside him, "we did it. We won." The dog tilted his head as if understanding every word. The girl laughed, throwing a small ball across the grass. Max bounded after it, bringing it back with his signature disciplined energy. The mother watched her daughter, feeling a swell of gratitude and relief. She had witnessed a transformation, from a frightened, silent child to a brave, confident little girl. And she knew that Max had played an irreplaceable role in that journey. Back in town, the case became an inspiration. Police departments began looking into canine-assisted interviews for child witnesses. The story of a tiny girl and a heroic dog spread far beyond their small community. Yet for the family, it wasn't about fame. It was about healing, safety, and trust restored. One evening, as the sun set, the little girl sat on the porch with Max curled beside her. She rested her head on his broad back and whispered, "You're my best friend, Max." Max let out a soft, contented sigh, his eyes half closed. It was a simple moment, yet profound. And it was the entire story: courage, trust, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a child and a dog who helped her find her voice. In the years that followed, the girl would often recount her experience, carefully, without fear, and always with Max nearby. She grew up understanding the power of truth, the value of bravery, and the remarkable impact of one tiny voice speaking in the right moment. And Max, ever vigilant, remained by her side. Justice had been served. Fear had been conquered. And hope had been restored. The courtroom drama was over, but the story of a courageous little girl and her steadfast canine would be remembered forever, not just in the headlines, but in the hearts of everyone who witnessed it.